Good morning and a very warm welcome indeed. Thank you very much for coming along to this session on keeping talent through the maternity and paternity transition. It's an aspect of well-being. I know you're here today to think about well-being as a very large overarching topic. This is an aspect of it that moves, I would say, beyond the maternity and paternity transition into much wider reaching areas. And actually, if you focus on this area and get some things right in this way, you're very welcome. Hi. If you manage the maternity and paternity transition successfully, many of the tools and approaches and the organisational conversations that you'll be having around that will span out into wider aspects of being a healthy 21st century workplace. But let's use this opportunity, because you've chosen this session now, to focus right in on what can we do for men and women becoming parents in the workplace, keeping their career on track as well as being the parent that they want to be in their home lives. So I'm Jennifer Liston-Smith, and I'm a director of a company called My Family Care. We provide a range of solutions to employers that are all about making work and family work together as a positive relationship, rather than a tension between those two, which can often be the case. So I head up the coaching and consultancy side of the business, and I was one of the people who, back in the early 2000s, thought that the words maternity and coaching ought to go together, and became a change agent in that area, working with many of the businesses that My Family Care works with today. So these are some examples of the companies that we work with, companies and organisations, which are making a commitment to making work and family a positive relationship. And the kinds of things we do, I head up the coaching and consultancy side, so from the name you can tell that we're working obviously with line managers, best practice training. We're doing a lot of work with individuals, whether that's through seminars, one-to-one coaching, a lot of virtual resources, an online parental leave toolkit that helps people plan and manage the whole transition as a software solution, with some great tips and advice within that. But the business as a whole also provides, hi Yola, come in, this is my colleague Yola. The business as a whole provides solutions around care as well, backup care for those care emergencies, when usual care arrangements for parents or carers of adult dependents, when those arrangements fall over, we can put quick solutions in place, and also ongoing care advice and solutions. So it's a business that's very practical and developmental and cultural in terms of the initiatives that we provide. So that's where I'm coming from. And our coaches, our wonderful team of coaches, have coached thousands of working parents and their line managers. So we know something about what it takes to combine the two. But just before we get into the presentation that draws on all of that experience from myself, what about yourselves in the room? How many of you here are already doing something in your organisations around the maternity or paternity transition? Just raise a hand. Okay, so it's not a hugely populated area at the moment, so you've come with an appetite to learn, I guess, which is great. And those of you that are already doing something, do feel free as I go along. I'll make some space for us to talk together at the end, but as I go through, if you have something to say, a question to ask, feel free. So why would we be looking at this transition in a person's working life of becoming a parent? What is the need? Well, for many organisations, we'll look at some of the numbers, some of the business case in a moment in terms of the actual figures. But for many organisations, it starts with observing what is actually happening in practice, some of the behaviours, some of the missed opportunities. You might find a returning parent. One of the engineering companies that we work with was telling us the other day of an individual, one of the HR business partners that we were having a round table with, was saying that she was talking with one of their recent returning parents who thought she was the only one who continually felt that she was falling short. I'm a parent myself of teenagers. We can easily, continually feel that we're falling short of being the person we want to be, both at work and at home, because we're stretched so thin, and we have huge values and aspirations in both of those full-time roles of our professional role and our home life role. So there can be a lot of missed opportunity to take advantage of the developmental aspect of the parent transition. It's not that when people become parents, they're less available to their career. Many people actually step up. We had an independent researcher come into a program that we've been running with one of our banking clients for over 10 years now, and she found that it depends the questions you ask. If you ask a group of returning parents how they're feeling, they might tell you about the anxiety, the guilt, the concern. I've been out of the workplace for a long time. Can I really step back in? Will the concerns, the care arrangements at home pull against my career? Will people see me as less ambitious and sideline me? All of those considerations can be there. But if you ask different questions, such as what has changed since you became a working parent, you will often hear people talk about the improved multitasking, better ability to prioritise, not sweating the small stuff, getting things done during a day in order to be able to get home and fulfil that other role. So if we don't pay attention to how people may be maintaining a facade and having nowhere to network and discuss and share the pain, if you like, but also share the practical tips and the successes, we really may be missing out on a population that's kind of got a huge amount to offer, a huge amount of developmental learning from being a parent, but actually feeling as if it's a deficit, feeling as if it's something that they're making up for. We may find managers who don't have conversations because I'm afraid of saying the right thing. Am I allowed to ask when they plan to come back? Am I allowed to ask whether they think they might want different working arrangements? Well, yes, there are all sorts of really sensible points during that transition at which you would want managers having those conversations. And we often provide very practical checklists on, you know, what to say and when, and a kind of framework for conversations. Organisations produce them themselves. It's something you can do. It's a no-cost solution in some ways that you can immediately start thinking about. What would we encourage managers to say, and at what point, you know, just before someone goes off on leave, just before they return, a month or so into return, checking in on career progression. Because there's a lot of missed opportunities. And of course, as we recognise, as a manager myself, as many of you probably are, it's quite easy to put our foot in it sometimes, not exactly say the right thing. Somebody announces they're expecting a child, and before we've got our people skills in gear, we've said something like, oh, not May, surely, that you'll be going off with that big new product launch, you know, which is exactly the wrong thing to say. It's all about congratulations. So we can have a lot of conversations that aren't happening. We can also have, these days, a failure to recognise that it's not only mums. A lot of fathers and partners, obviously people may be in same-sex relationships, people may be solo parents, obviously, but where there is a dad in the mix, they have often been overlooked and kind of discounted by managers, by employers. Shared parental leave is another great opportunity for yourselves to be an engaging employer. It's just to raise the profile of the possibility for people to take shared parental leave beyond the first 2 weeks of leave, which belong to the birth mother or the primary adopter. The remaining 50 weeks in a year of leave are now up for sharing in very, very flexible ways. So there are great opportunities to open that conversation up and to enable it to be about working parents, not working mums. But equally, as I touched on earlier, that way that parents may assume that they'll be treated as less ambitious when they come back from a period of leave around having a child. We need to be really careful about what unconscious bias, what filters, what assumptions are at play there. Somebody comes back from leave with the best intention, the manager or colleague says, oh, well, you won't want to be involved in that project with the late teleconferences because you've got other priorities. And actually, maybe that's the one thing they really do want to get their teeth back into. So again, it's all about, the starting point can be about noticing the behaviours, noticing the missed opportunities. The solutions, we find, can fall into 3 overlapping areas. And these are things that you could be thinking as we talk together. What am I already doing? What's my organisation already doing well in these areas? And what opportunities have we got to do something more? And they needn't be high-cost solutions. Sometimes there are simple things that you can simply put in place, simply improve. So let's have a look at each of these 3. The developmental and well-being, the leadership and management, and the enablers and tools. The developmental and well-being side, we could call it the emotional aspect. We're going to cover in a little bit more detail in a moment, because that's where coaching, mentoring, sponsorship, those kind of solutions can come in. So I'll say a little bit more about that shortly. But I wanted to make sure that we address the cultural side. We've just heard, those of you that were in the plenary session, of the overarching importance of culture, of management approaches, management capability. So here, this is where manager checklists are really vital. But there are other things you can do. You can make sure that your policies are engaging. We've worked with some organisations that have really good provision in place, great programmes, great policies and benefits, but they're hard to find. They're hidden on the internet. People have to look really hard, or have to ask somebody if they want to know what the policy is. And actually, if you've got great policies and benefits and programmes in place, you should make it possible for people that are not yet expecting children to find, so they know the great things you're providing for them. So a place on the internet that's nicely branded, nicely worded, it's encouraging. Maybe a booklet. Many of the organisations we worked with have provided a booklet that has nice pictures. It's more friendly, more engaging. So there are opportunities there on the cultural side. There are also, there's a piece of work we published earlier this year. You can find it through our website. It's just one of the pieces of research we've done, which is about phased return from maternity and adoption leave. And it's something that many employers are beginning to think about. And again, you can use policy, you can use this as a kind of cultural measure. You're very welcome. Can you enable people to return from a period of leave? Obviously, looking at alternative ways of working, because your whole workforce is probably interested in different ways of working increasingly. But somebody coming back from leave might want to use their holidays, accrued holidays, or possibly keeping in touch days, or shared parental leave in touch days. You can have up to 10 keeping in touch days, which you can work during maternity or adoption leave, up to 20 shared parental leave in touch days. And you could possibly make a part-time working arrangement through those days or through accrued holidays in your first weeks back as a way of having a phased return. So just an idea there, thinking differently about how to enable people back at a policy and cultural level. So there are other big picture things to do, but really importantly, line managers, whatever we can do to equip line managers. It's not a stick to beat people with, because line managers have huge workloads and are very busy and often distracted when all of this life is going on for their team members. But if we can provide simple, practical checklists, resources, intranet, clarity as to where the policies are and what they are, that can really, really help. On the practical side, I mentioned earlier that My Family Care provides backup care. That can be hugely enabling, because when working parents return to work, care provision can be quite challenging. Care arrangements can fall over. So how do we help support that? But also on a practical level, if you have people who've got alternative working arrangements and they've managed to present to you the business case for how they can deliver their role in a slightly different working arrangement, have you got the technology in place? Or as we heard in the plenary earlier, the right seating and desk arrangements at home? Are you enabling people to work in different ways and make that practical? Have you got provision for people to video conference with team members so they feel included if they happen to be working remotely while their child's in care, obviously, but working from home, perhaps to have a shorter commute and that sort of thing? So there are various things we can do on different levels, cultural and practical, as well as the developmental and emotional. But when it comes to the developmental side, you can provide coaching programs to people through the maternity and paternity transition in a whole host of ways. So we provide a huge amount of one-to-one coaching, often for high potential or senior individuals going through the maternity or paternity transition, often group coaching, or indeed increasingly virtual group coaching by webinar, maybe for a middle group in the organisation if you're looking at a blended programme. And online, our online, as I mentioned, our online parental leave toolkit is something that's relevant whether you're senior or you're the whole population, but you might put that in place for the wider population while selecting some individuals for one-to-one coaching, either due to their seniority or due to their particular need. So there's a whole range of solutions you can buy in, but in terms of what you can also do, as we mentioned, you can put checklists in place for managers. We're increasingly seeing organisations launching internal buddy and mentor programs. I was recently at the Financial Conduct Authority. We've done many of these in many different organisations, but most recently the FCA was putting in place an internal mentor program, and we simply did a launch event with some guidelines on how to manage that relationship and maintain a light level of confidentiality and boundary and expectation around it. But essentially it's a kind of network. So you can have people sharing experience, hugely enabling. You can enable keeping in touch days. Obviously, we mentioned earlier, people can simply come in and work those days, but you can also design a day in which you have some networking, getting people to make a keeping in touch day around a day that you've arranged. And we've even provided pop-up creches for organisations to invite people in to have a keeping in touch day to coincide with, let's say, a business update or an important briefing about company values or whatever it may be, or an important training session, professional training. So making use of opportunities to get people together to network. These are low-cost solutions that you might well be able to achieve yourselves internally, and you can couple those with obviously solutions from external experts where they can be both in person in the room and increasingly virtual as well, virtual solutions through telephone, video conference and so on. And any help you can provide with finding care, advice on care solutions, tends to be very well received. So as an example of a programme, this is Norton Rose Fulbright's 3-minute collected together footage on a group coaching programme that we provide there. So that's a group coaching programme in which there's a post-leave workshop and a pre-leave workshop and a networking lunch between the two that happen on the same day. And people who are off on leave can also access a one-to-one coaching call to prepare and boost confidence towards their return. So let's have a listen.
Our maternity program came about after we surveyed all our women who went on maternity leave to understand a little bit more about their experiences, how they were using benefits, and what support would be most useful to them. Subsequently, we relaunched our maternity coaching program as a group maternity coaching program with My Family Care. It fits into our overall talent approach because 50% of our people are women, and that's not yet reflected at senior leadership level. Over the last 2 years, we've seen our maternity returners increase by 14%, and our retention of those women 1 year later. And this program has been an important contributor to that increase.
What's really valuable about having a coaching program is that the women going through maternity leave or the men going on shared parental leave feel like they can talk about any things that are concerning them in a really safe environment. So everything is confidential in the room. As a qualified lawyer and now coach, I feel in a really good position to be able to coach people going through this transition within a law firm. So our coaching approach is very practical and focuses on helping people find solutions to the particular issue or challenge that they're looking at in the session. And this means that we include our childcare consultants through the coaching program, because the right childcare is crucial to making a successful transition.
Our programme is divided into 3 parts. We have a pre-leave group coaching workshop, we have a during leave one-to-one coaching call available, and also a post-leave group coaching workshop. One of the ways that we've developed the programme is to run the pre and post workshops on the same day, and we provide a networking lunch so that the participants can share ideas and experiences over that lunchtime.
The opportunity to come together with other mums on maternity leave provides a space where you can share ideas and challenges and actually solve some of the problems that you feel like you're facing.
It's been particularly helpful today because it's been a really useful session to focus on the run-up to maternity leave, what we need to think about before going on leave, and then what we might need to think about in advance of return, things like keep in touch days, talking to people in the team whilst on leave and in advance of coming back.
For me, it highlighted some areas that I need to work on and some concerns that I didn't even know I had, but I actually need to be concerned about them. And it was also really useful to meet other people who are going through the same process. I think it's great for Norton Rose Fulbright because it sends the message out to everybody that they are investing in parents, and it is an inclusive environment that we work in.
So there's a few insights there. There's a huge message around networking. So anything that you can do to create networks, many organisations these days have some kind of parents network, or family network can be a really good umbrella to put your networking under, because that can include carers with responsibility for adult dependents who don't have the same defined period of leave, and it's often a much harder caring responsibility, because it can be even harder to talk about in the workplace. It can be hard enough as a returning parent to as we were saying at the outset, to manage that juggle and sometimes feel as if we're maintaining a facade. But people who've got adult dependents can feel there's even greater difficulty to speak up about that. So any kind of networks that you can create, and it usually takes willing volunteers to get those off the ground, but if you can create a place for people to meet and exchange tips, exchange practical ideas, it also normalises the transition. It normalises the fact that it can be challenging. If you were bringing somebody into the workplace as a new starter, you would give them an induction. Often people have been out maybe for a year on maternity or adoption leave, or many months on shared parental leave, and they come back in and things have changed. The role's different, the team's different, the email system's different, whatever it may be. Some kind of reintroduction is needed so people can be productive. It's about the right thing to do, but it's also about productivity, about engagement, about loyalty, because we've found through repeated types of research out there that people tend to leave not to look after children necessarily, but they leave and gravitate towards organisations that are more enabling of work-life integration. So you may find they're going to other organisations that are competing in the same space. So some clear messages there from the people that have been through that transition and have got those insights as to what helps. But in numbers terms, what's the impact when we do address this? Because you might be thinking, well, this is an aspect of well-being, and you know, we would pay attention to people returning from long-term sickness absence. This is another absence, if you like, but it's also a person combining a really important aspect of family life that can pull against career if we don't enable it to combine really effectively. What's the impact of doing it well, or indeed not addressing it? Well, the business case, increasingly organisations that we've worked with that have put something in place have seen all of these areas addressed. There was a case study done a while back by Expert HR with Citigroup, which is one of our long-standing clients, and these kinds of things were coming out there, particularly engagement, showing up very much in engagement surveys among working parents, being highly engaged because of programs in place that give out a really good cultural message. So you can expect the overall better value proposition to be recognised. You can expect as well, as I hinted at the earlier point of this session, you can expect better conversations. If you're having better conversations about the maternity-paternity transition, then line managers will be having better conversations about people's lives in general. But you will also notice, and let's have a look at this, that it will impact the return rate quite dramatically and reliably. So let's come back to that in a moment. And let's say we know that from broadly between 1 to 7% of your working population will be on some kind of maternity or paternity leave at any one time, sometimes higher, it depends on the demographics of your workforce. We know from the Office for National Statistics that the average return rate is about just over 3/4 of people will naturally return from maternity leave. And it will cost, well, often quite far upwards of £30,000 to replace a leaver. But there are a lot of figures out there from the CIPD. This one came from Barclays, talking about replacing somebody in retail banking at a conference that we spoke at together as a client of ours a little while back. But it can be very far upwards of 30,000 to replace people that represent a lot of knowledge. Parents can be 10 years into their career. Norton Rose Fulbright, you heard, had an increase of 14 percentage points in their return rate, having put a programme in place, having given out the message that this is important, having coupled that programme with best practice briefings that we put in place for managers, and a really nice welcoming pack for new parents and some checklists for managers, and achieved that. Page group, we helped them initiate some networking, maternity networking sessions, and then they took them on internally, having got the kind of insights and framework. They said, well, actually, let's just replicate this all around the UK. So that's been a huge success as well in terms of pure increase in return rates measured over time. So in an organisation of 1,000 people, many of you will have bigger organisations, let's say you had 4% of your people on leave at any one time, so 40 people off on leave. If you increase your percentage, let's say 77%, that Office for National Statistics figure, if you were to increase that 77% return rate by 12 percentage points, the page group figure, then you would increase that to 89% return rate. You would have nearly 5 more people returning, 4.8 people more returning out of your 40. And that would be a saving. If you multiply that by £30,000, using the figure earlier, you'd have that level of saving over £140,000, which would far outweigh the investment you'd be needing to make in any of these low-cost or no-cost solutions, certainly, or indeed in putting a program in place. You get a great feel-good from running a program. These are from Q3 this year. These are people finding the coaching engaging and saying that it encourages their commitment to their employer. So you get an obvious feel-good from anything you put in place, whether it's a local networking group, whether it's a formal program. So you'll get that immediate both appreciation and huge boost in confidence, and people feeling this is a place I can step back into. And we found that beyond the kind of happy sheets, beyond the feel-good, we identified 6 factors through working with a large number of clients over a number of years. These are the factors that we have identified as being crucial to measure. So we asked people, how does your score compare before coaching to after coaching on these 6 success factors? The clarity of your plans for your way forward, so whether they're pre-leave, during leave, recently returned, clarity of your plans, how are you feeling before and after coaching, and we'll look at the figures in a moment. How equipped do you feel for influential conversations, or for good conversations with the influential stakeholders involved in your transition? Stakeholders is a key word. If you're doing anything about the maternity or paternity transition, helping people identify their stakeholders, as you would in any change program. Who's affected by this change of you going out on leave and coming back? And how can you have better conversations with them? Such a key consideration. Your confidence. How confident are you feeling? And that usually gets a huge boost, as we'll see in a moment. What about practical know-how and skills? And this is where networking can help. Obviously, coaching can help, especially where it's coaching with an element of mentoring. So, for example, all of our coaches are working parents themselves, and they've all worked in corporate senior roles as well as being excellent coaches. But if you're doing some sort of internal buddying, mentoring program, there's a passing on of experience, a passing on of practical skills and know-how. People feeling valued and supported, it really shows. You know, my employer wants me back. They've arranged this special keeping in touch day for me. They're coaching me on my return to think about keeping my career on track. They're coaching my manager to think about what best practice looks like. How much do they really value me? That's impressive. They really want me to keep my career on track. So feeling valued and supported, and feeling equipped to manage ongoing career. So it's not just a question of dusting people off, managing to get them through the door with a minimum level of baby sick down their suit or something. It's actually, are you having good career conversations? Are you keeping in line with the projects that you want to be doing? Can you see where your career is leading you? You're leaving your child at home. You've come back to work. What are your career vision and aims? And when we measure those, so this was the last year, 2006, and we asked people to rate their feeling on a scale of 1 to 10 before coaching and after coaching on those 6 factors. And then we looked at the increase, and it is an increase, the increase afterwards as a percentage of the before score. So this is how much more. So 46% more confident on a scale of 1 to 10, for example, after coaching. So these to us are really important factors to be thinking about. And you will get different impacts on all of these, but feeling 1/5 more valued and supported by the employer through having that kind of coaching program, whether that is virtual, in person, in groups, because this is across all the different types of coaching that we've measured. So turning back to yourselves, what about your experience? I know a couple of you have got programs in place. I'd like to invite you maybe to turn to somebody near you, and then we can maybe hear from the floor. Maybe a little bit of a discussion. What are you already doing well in this area? Feel free to introduce yourselves if you're sitting by people that you don't know. It's a really good chance to network for a few minutes. What are you already doing well? You may or may not have some kind of coaching or mentoring program in place, but maybe you've got great policies, maybe you've got a great intranet site that makes it really clear and easy to find. Maybe you've got some kind of networking group where people can meet up. So what are you doing that's already working well? And sitting here, taking the time to think about this, what else could you consider doing? Let's use the opportunity now to either share some insights from what you were just discussing. Sometimes if you've had an idea to put something in place, it can really help to firm it up, to say it out loud. So feel free to take the opportunity. Or if you're already doing something well and you want to share that best practice, fantastic. Or indeed, if you have a question or an observation or a challenge, whatever you may want to use this time to say. So who's got our first question or comment or thing that you want to exchange? Great, thank you. Hannah, could we take a microphone there? Thanks. Sorry. Are you happy to speak with the microphone? I'm not going to.
Okay. We just work in quite a small organisation, and we were just saying a lot of the time it's about HODs not having the confidence to deal with like that initial, oh, I'm pregnant, and they get scared, and they just sort of take a step back, and they're like, oh, so-and-so's pregnant, and you're like, okay, that's fine. And we kind of just we were just sort of saying we need to do more coaching, because there's such a sort of change of HODs all the time, and it's just sort of keeping on top of the coaching and telling them what they can, what they can't say, and sort of going down that route, really. That's sort of a suggestion that we just sort of came up with.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. Great point. So heads of departments or line managers, senior people that will be in that influential position. When we help organisations put checklists in play, we do often put at the top of that checklist, remember the first thing you say when somebody announces that they're having a child, they're having or adopting a child, will be remembered and will be talked about. And if it's really positive, that's going to be an investment. If it's negative, it will also be passed on to others. So sometimes, it's a reminder, and then the tools, because it's no good saying to people, you've got to talk, if they're thinking, well, I'm afraid of saying the wrong thing. So, some pointers to say, well, 3 months before a person goes on leave, make sure you're developing a good plan for the handover. Make sure that you're seeing that handover not as an end, but as an interim prior to a hand back. Really important that they're looking towards the person's return, because it can so easily become a sort of, well, bye-bye, all the best. So just the kind of nuances as well as the practicalities, giving people an indication of timing. Here's a good time to have a conversation. Here's a template you could use for your handover if that's something that you do, or, why not develop with your team member a way of planning their handover that looks at all the important aspects of their role, who'll cover them, how they'll get them back. What might they like to stay in touch with during a Keeping in Touch Day? How could you co-design that? Again, when we've created Keeping in Touch Day checklists for organisations, and you can do this yourselves, how do you make the best use of a Keeping in Touch Day? What kind of work will you come in and do? But who could you have lunch with or a coffee with? Again, coming back to that word stakeholders, who are the important people? They could be mentors, they could be sponsors, people that can advocate for you. While you're off on leave, they can speak up for you in the room. How can you factor them into a Keeping in Touch Day? So helping managers think about that. How can they not only do the policy side, but help think about the continuity, the engagement, and then when that person comes back, make sure there's a meet and greet on day one. If you can't be there, someone else should be. Check in with them, catch them doing well in the first month or so back, because that's going to be a huge confidence boost, concrete recognition because they will probably be thinking, whatever facade you might see, you know, have I got a cotton wool head? Can I still do this? You know, will I manage all my workload and get for the nursery pickup in time? So any kind of concrete praise and recognition. So great, good luck with that. Any kinds of practical checklists you can give with pointers that encourage people to have the conversations. What else? Sure.
I can sort of summarise for us. So three things came up. One was that there's a slight difference between the first baby being born and the second. That has a dynamic effect. The other was the interplay between parents and non-parents within the office and fairness of approach. And then the third was the family care, that as well as looking after people at work, how you're able to look after their family when they're away, so they're not worried in that aspect.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. Really, really important points. So yes, wider family. I mean, parents is one. It's a little bit like addressing gender diversity because it's kind of easiest to see and address. Parents are in some ways easiest to see and address in the workplace because there's a very definite period of leave and so on. But not to forget the huge other, sometimes slightly more hidden aspects of family life that people are managing, and of life. You know, people will be studying, people will be running a charity triathlon. Really important that managers are enabling and recognising that too. So as I said at the outset, having better conversations in this area should always be a stepping stone to having better conversations about people combining life generally. So yeah, really important points there. And the potential backlash against non-parents is really important to recognise. And I would say if you're putting any kind of training or best practice workshops in place for managers, and that can be super useful in terms of managers exchanging experience. You were talking about HODs and how do you get people on board. If you've got some people doing it well, just sharing their experience in an honest way is great. But probably even better still, if you can make that a workshop about, you know, different ways of working, alternative ways of working or flexible working, not only necessarily about parents or even parents and carers, but how do you enable people to combine work and life? And then, I mean, I remember sitting in another of our big engineering organisation clients some years ago, and there was a manager who at first seemed to, you know, not be very bought into being there. But as we went through the session and we talked about flexible working, and they were, as a group, saying it's really hard to set expectations. And he said, well, I knew that I couldn't figure it out by myself, so I got the team to set some guidelines. What do we expect of each other if we're working in different ways? And it was such a brilliant tool. It, you know, it's one of the best aspects of that session. And people say, oh, Brian, what a great idea. How do you do that? So actually enabling the team, it's not just about, certainly not about working mothers only or working fathers, it's about work-life integration, work-life blend, and how do you help a team to set guidelines and expectations together, whatever people are managing alongside work. I think that's really, really important. Any one last point or comment before we close? Thank you. Some really rich inputs there from you, and hopefully your conversation yielded a lot more as well for you to take forward. myfamilycare.co.uk, if you drop by, there are lots of resources there. I mentioned that phased return research, for example. Lots of case studies. You saw what Northern Rose Fulbright is doing. There are lots of other organisations doing this differently, all sorts of different ways that you can do it, and lots of research papers and guides to help you think that through.